Morning,
Morning.
sir.
Yes.
Good
Mr.
morning.
Biagi, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
How are you today?
I'm very well, and you?
Very well, we thank God. Bless you.
Okay, our participants are coming in. Well, we know we have quite a large class size, so we'll just allow a few minutes for others to join. Do accept our apologies, but I crave your indulgence so that we can allow others to join. It's just 11, so everybody's still trying to join. Good morning, if you're just joining, and welcome to the DCSL Webinar series. It's 11:02, so if you just indulge me and allow some 2 minutes for our other colleagues to join so that we go right ahead. So 2 more minutes and we'll go right ahead. Okay, it's exactly 11:04 here. Maybe it's a good time to start. Others will join us in the course of our conversation. It will not be nice to keep everybody who joined early on the call whilst we're waiting for others. So we'll just have them join when it can. So a very good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the 24th webinar series of the DCSL Academy. Today, we're going to be discussing the 2024 economic outlook. And before I go ahead, I would just like to wish everybody on the call a happy new year. And we pray that you have a glorious 2024. In continuation of our webinar series and to set the appropriate tone for 2024, we're glad to welcome you to this webinar series themed 2024 Economic Outlook, brought to you proudly by DCSL Academy, the Ukrainian arm of the DCSL Corporate Services Limited. My name is Nike Taiwo, and I'm honored to have you join us and welcome you on the call today. We hope to spend about 1 hour, 30 minutes on the call, or a little bit longer, and it promises to be worth your while. To moderate discussions today on the call, we have our able moderator in person of Mr. Wale Agbenyogi, who is the Group Managing Director of Quadros Capital Limited, and he'll be engaging on a fireside chat with Dr. Biodun Adedipe, who is the founder and chief consultant of B. Adedipe Associate, popularly known as BA Consult, for a fireside chat on the 2024 economic outlook. Before I hand over proceedings to our moderator, we thought to just quickly introduce our services to people who are on the call, who are just having interactions with DCSL for the first time, and to also set a few ground rules. If you just give me a minute to quickly share my screen with the ground rules before I hand over proceedings to our moderator. To enable a seamless session, would urge you to please leave comments and contributions for the attention of all participants in the chat box, and then use the Q&A box for your questions. We have allotted some time for questions in the course of the conversation. So please leave your comments in the chat box if you would like to make a comment around the discussions that we're currently having, and if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box. We know that some of the things that we're going to be discussing, you've already started listening to them since the beginning of 2024, but please keep an open mind. Let's listen for content before forming an opinion. Let's suspend judgment until our subject matter experts give us some pointers as to what we should be looking at. I have on the screen a few of our service offerings. So we are known essentially for governance services, executive talent recruitment and selection, company secretariat, the DCSL Academy, which is the unit putting this together for us, and the business and compliance advisory. This is also a list of the various service offerings we have under the broad service offerings that I just mentioned. I'll quickly just run us through the program flow and then hand over proceedings to our moderator for the day. We have the opening, which is what I'm currently trying to do, and I'll quickly briefly introduce Mr. Agboyongi after now. Mr. Agboyongi would also introduce the resource person, Dr. Adedipe, and then would deploy a poll just to get our views on some issues that we've identified. The chat will be for about 45 minutes, and we would have some moderated Q&A sessions. That is the point where the questions that we've highlighted, identified using the Q&A box will be taken. So please feel free to drop your comment, and then we'll take the final words. I have Mr. Agboyongi's profile on the screen. Just to note that Mr. Wale Agboyongi is a group managing director, CEO of Codros Capital Limited. He's a consummate entrepreneur and investment banker with specialist knowledge of securities training, asset management, and investment banking services. He has an extensive global network of institutional high network clients and investors across financial markets. This morning, Mr. Agboyongi will be moderating the call. Thank you for joining us, sir, and I hand over proceedings to you.
Thank you very much, Nikhil, for that introduction. Thank you very much. And I welcome everybody to this webinar series, DCSL Webinar Series 24. And the theme is 2024 Economic Outlook. Before I introduce our guest and a speaker today, I would like to provide a brief background on the theme of today's fire chat. And we're going to get a lot of fire today from our guest, Dr. Biodun Adedipe. So the economic outlook for 2024 remains challenging, as reflected in the performance of key sectors seen in 2023. A negative foreign exchange market, unprecedented levels of inflation, and a GDP growth of 2.54 as at Q3 24 pose significant hurdles. However, experts oversee potential improvement later in 2024 as the economy adjusts to new realities. The prospects for 2024 depend largely on domestic reforms, global economic conditions, oil market dynamics, and effective monetary policies. Vigilant monitoring is crucial for informed decisions by stakeholders and investors. With the onset of President Tinubu administration 4th-year anniversary, the nation stands at critical crossroads, navigating profound economic and social transformations that require astute evaluation and proactive measures. So the objective of today's seminar is for us to be able to analyze global and local economic landscape, and for us to examine regional subtleties and identify opportunities within challenges. And So we're expecting a lot today from Dr. Biodun Adedipe, and it's my absolute pleasure to have Dr. Adedipe at today's fire chat. Dr. Adedipe is someone that is very passionate about Nigeria and the economy, and I've had so many interactions with him, and I know he's been busy since December, attending so many strategy sessions of corporate bodies and government government institutions. So it's my pleasure to have you here today, Doctor. You're welcome. Good morning, sir.
Thank you so very much. My very good friend and brother. It's nice to be with you on this platform.
Yes. So for the benefit of participants at this webinar, I'll just go straight to provide them with your profile. I know a lot of people, know you in the industry and in Nigeria generally, but for the benefit of some international participants who may not know, I'll just go straight to read, your profile before we go straight into today's, webinar. Dr. Biodun Adedipe is the founder and chief consultant of B. Adedipe Associates Limited, BA Consult, with about 4 decades of postgraduate work and professional experience that cuts across university teaching, investment banking, project finance, management and financial consulting, as well as leadership in business and not-for-profit organizations. Biodun has had an illustrious career that has taken him through the University of Lagos, Enterprise Consulting Group, the World Bank, International Management Bank PLC, and First City Monument Bank PLC. Biodun's technical experience is wide-ranging, covering corporate strategy, research, and economic analysis, solving complex business problems, and assisting clients to execute business solutions in line with their corporate strategies. He's a highly sought-after analyst and commentator on government fiscal operations and economic policies, and strategy design and execution for financial institutions, non-financial business organizations, and not-for-profit organizations. He has served in various capacities in government, including member of the Presidential Committee of Experts on the Redenomination of Naira, November 2008, member of the Federal Government Committee of Experts on Expenditure Review, October 2010 to March 2011, and Senior Special Assistant to the President, Financial Sector Development in the Office of the Chief Economic Advisor in 2011. Dr. Adedipe received his doctorate degree in industrial economics, specializing in corporate finance from the University of Lagos in 1989, in economics first class from the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, OAU, in 1980, and bagged several awards in the process, including Sir Adam Thompson Scholarship as visiting doctoral student to the University of Sussex, UK, in 1984. He's a member of the several respected professional bodies, including the Institute of Directors, Nigeria, the Nigerian Economic Society, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, and American Economic Association. It's my pleasure once again to welcome Dr. Biodun Adedipe. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so very much.
We'll go straight, to the subject matter of today. And we have 45 minutes, to get this done. God help us, because I know we have a lot to discuss. And I just hope that we'll be able to compress all this, within the time slot that we have. Nigeria in 2023, last year was a roller coaster. So many things, happened last year. And some of them include the commencement of, the new president's administration, President Tinubu administration, the removal of PMS subsidy, liberalization of FX window, and floating of the Naira, suspension of Godwin Emefiele as CBN governor. There were so many of such events, in 2023 that made that year very eventful. But doctor, what made 2023 stand out for you as an economist? What were those key points that you saw in 2023?
Yeah, thank you so very much for this opener. Now, we put that in 2 crucibles. The first is what happened early in the year, which of course carried from the last quarter of 2022. And then the second, as you said, is what happened after President Tinubu took office. So now, looking at the beginning of the year, we had what we call demonetization. Okay, demonetization simply means that the monetary authorities want us to move away from currencies, as in paper money, coins, whatever you want to describe it to be, to electronic, settlement of transactions. And so, but in doing that, it was badly designed and poorly executed. So it now followed the trajectory of what happened to India in 2018, which means we did not learn a lesson from India when we did that in Nigeria. So, and also forgetting that our economy is largely cash-driven. Most commercial transactions are cash-driven. So that, to some extent, hobbled the economy. Then toward the general election as well, there was fierce scarcity. Now, if you look at the combination of those two, they dampened the pace of the economy and resulted in the very meager growth we experienced in the first quarter at 2.31%. Now, when President Tinubu took office, May 29th, he came with what I will refer to as major policy shifts. Of course, two of them you have mentioned, the removal of oil subsidy, which in actual correct interpretation, he didn't remove it. The removal was done by Buhari when he signed into law the Petroleum Industry Act in December 2021. They now said implementation of removal of subsidy, which is sections 205 to 208 of that act, will be postponed by 18 months. Which, when you do the simple arithmetic, we place it in June 2023. Okay? So naturally, what President Tinubu, that's the way I interpret it, said to us is that, look, I've come into office now, I can't see any provision for subsidy, either in the budget for 2023, which of course is a law, because it was an act, and then by the provisions of PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, which of course those sections took effect same June of 2023. So then unified exchange rates also meant that the largely import-dependent economy now will have to bring in those imports at a much higher cost. And of course, we know the pattern in Nigeria historically. Once there's a movement in exchange rate, it affects all prices. And that, of course, went on to affect the rate of inflation, which of course ticked up to what we saw last 20-something, almost 30 years ago. All right. So all of this happened, and of course, there was the following macroeconomic instability. So, but of course, we can put it, like I said, the second critical major policy shift, first subsidy removal, unified exchange rates, and of course, there were also the 43 items that were banned from the official FX window, which of course, the CBN unbanned. Of course, that was not so much any different in the sense that even when the ban existed, most of those that bought FX to trade bought from the alternative markets, not the official market. Okay? So which some of us said it was unnecessary for CBN governor to announce that anyway, because it was given. Okay? So, but again, that was part of what happened. Then the promise of fiscal consolidation. He said that, look, the plethora of taxes that business people face in Nigeria were going to be reviewed, and then we do consolidation on one side, that we consolidate taxes, and then on the other hand, consolidate also government fiscal operations, where government agencies we now have a free-for-all, generate revenue and spend it, but everything will now be consolidated. So those were the major policy shifts. For me, they defined 2023 and set a platform for 2024.
Fantastic. So, to put it in proper context, and I hear you clearly, I mean, we were in a year where the last government was winding down, and, all they wanted to do was to, consolidate on the economic reforms. And when a new government came, they also tried to set a tone, for the new administration. Of course, there were some teething problems that we had. And so that made that 2023 highly, highly eventful, for the economy. And of course, I mean, I can imagine some of the challenges that, operators of the economy face in stabilizing the economy, especially the new finance minister, the CBN governor. So I agree with you, highly, highly eventful. But hold your thought, Dr. Adedipe. I know we're supposed to start with a poll, actually, missed. And I don't know whether we should take the poll now or wait till after the fire chat. Nike, should we take the poll now or take it after the fire chat?
We can take it now, sir, if you want.
Yes. So, Doctor, hold your thought because I know you have a lot of things to tell us. So we take the poll now, then we go straight to the next question, which will be what you think the economic downturn in 2023 was, and and the positive reversal that we're expecting in 2024. But we'll go straight to the poll now, which is on the screen for our participants to to click on. So we have the poll on the screen now. So go ahead, please, and vote straight away. I think we have about 2 minutes for the poll, or 5 minutes for the poll, actually. How did your business fare in 2023? That's the first question. And what factor had the most impact on your business in 2023? The removal of fuel subsidy, price inflation, decline of the naira against the dollar, insecurity, employee attrition. Those were those key highlights, which affected business in 2023. So go right ahead to vote on the poll. It'll be interesting to see the result or outcome of this poll, before we go ahead. I think we should be getting ready to round up. So we should be getting ready to round up now. Yes. Okay. I think that should be okay now. I'm sure we have all voted for the poll. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. We'll get the result of the poll much later. But we'll go straight to our second question, for today. Dr. Dedikwe, so 2023, okay, we have the result now. How did your business fare in 2023? Great. Only 4 out of 38, 11%. Good. 13 out of 38. Okay. 17 out of 38. Very poorly. 4 out of 38. So between good and okay, we have about 79% of the participants. It just shows how challenging that year, was. Number 2, which factor had the most impact on your business in 2023? Removal of the fuel subsidy. And of course, the attendant implication of that removal and price inflation, 19%. So, I think, by the time we get into, the webinar proper, we'll see the impact of this, and Doctor will tell us more about that. Okay. Yes. Doctor, I think we should go ahead now.
Okay.
So,
thank
you. The second question, I think this will be very interesting, is the factors that contributed to the economic downturn in 2023, and what we are expecting in terms of the positive reversal expected in 2024. And I'll put it in proper context, what happened in 2023 in terms of the economic dynamics. Growth in GDP, 2.54% as at Q3 2023.
Yeah.
Because we're recovering from cash crunch and a lot of those things that happened, the PMS subsidy, lingering currency pressure, and so on. World Bank, recently came up with an estimate for 2024, 3.3%. And of course, I read some of your reports where you almost, got it right as well at, 3.3 or 3.23, for that matter. So what contributed to the problem we had in 2020 in terms of the economic, downturn? And what are those things that we expect in 2024 that will give us that reversal in fortune, Doc? So, just briefly.
Yeah, excellent question. Now, my first perspective to this is that we had a lot of policy disconnect from the reality of the economy and the markets, and of course, inconsistencies. But the big number in it was central bank on mission drift, as we describe it. That means central bank had left central banking as we know it and went more into development banking. And of course, in the process, also a lot of, what one might call I don't want to use the commonly used word corruption now, okay? But in the process, there were a lot of leakages. That is professional economic terminology, okay? So all of those, of course, created a lot of imbalances. And I will point to one in the area of ways and means advances given by the central bank to the federal government. Now, that completely was out of the provisions of the Central Bank Act itself, as well as even the other side, Fiscal Responsibility Act. That alone became a major issue, running to about 23 trillion naira, which of course was inherited by the new administration. Now, that on the one side. The other side was that even there were fiscal imbalances, as you described them in economics. That means we were spending much more than we're generating as revenue, which is not a problem for an economist. But the big question would be, what did we spend the money on? So now, by the time you begin to trace that, we now find that a lot of the monies borrowed were actually used to pay for the current expenditure. And that is highly unproductive, but more inflationary in nature, all right? Now, beyond that also, there's what we call poorly sequenced and implemented policies. We've talked about one earlier on. Take, for example, when we began the currency exchange, what we should have done was to look at how much money was out there in circulation. Before Central Bank did that, about 3.4 trillion naira. Then by the time we brought in the new currencies, we did less than 300 billion. In which case, we did not take account that the infrastructure for digital transactions was not robust enough to carry that difference we wanted to push to that platform. And so it caused a lot of issues with cash scarcity. Of course, policy managers index collapsed to less than 50. We're looking at about 42.3 for February 2023. And of course, March 2023, just a little above that. So as you rightly said, that made the economic growth sluggishly, 2.31% first quarter, second quarter, 2.51%, third quarter, 2.54%. When you average those three quarters, you get 2.45%. And that's perhaps the weakest in the last 5 years. And so that made us now say the economy, when the data comes out, will likely grow at less than 3% for 2023. So now, when you look at all this, you now add also labor unrest. Because we often forget that. And my interpretation of it is this. Take the Nigerian GDP, divide by 365. That gives you how much value we create on a daily basis. So for every day labor goes out of work, they stay off from work, industrial action. It means that is what we are losing in the economy for each of those days. So if you look at the number of days of industrial action, multiplied by the average per day of our GDP, that gives you how much we also lost in terms of value we would have created. So all of these, of course, contributed to the downturn in 2023. The question now is, what is the prospect? Is there a likely possible reversal of that in 2024? Yes, the government has taken some actions already. if you look back at towards the end of last year, the wage award to civil servants, all right, moving it to 35,000 naira per, as minimum. And then you look also at fiscal consolidation, which is very, very interesting here. Two major things have happened there. The first is that a lot of state-owned enterprises, SOEs as we call them, were now reviewed in terms of whether we generate revenue or not, and therefore depend largely on federal government. So in which case, if you depend on federal government, then certainly we say there's nothing we can do about that. We use, for example, NIPSS in Kuru, that's National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies. If you look at the budget for this year, it has an allocation of about 3.something billion naira, but it doesn't generate revenue, zero revenue. When you look at the budget, the appropriation bill, okay? So in which case, that is an example of a government-owned agency, all right, that doesn't generate revenue. But if you generate revenue going forward from this year, it is compulsory that every kobo you generate must come into the consolidated account to start with. And that it now will be a matter of what percentage we now give to you, not that we retain everything and use your own discretion to decide how much you give to the financial account. So that is a major shift in policy that gives us an idea that this year might be better. Okay, that also closes the gap in terms of leakage that I mentioned earlier on. So that is also going to improve the fiscal environment. And of course, a lot of things to do with business environment, that is business-friendly policies. No new taxes. They've given all that soundbite. No increase in tax rates. They've given all the soundbite. But what they said is that we collapse taxes so that the 72 odd taxes we pay in Nigeria will now be reduced to maximum of 10. They made a promise of that. So that is a good one in terms of looking for business people like you and I. Okay? And the other side is that they will now have more revenue. Therefore, they won't borrow the same way they did in the past. And again, if you look at the budget of this year compared to that of 2023, the amount involved in debt service will drop. If you look at the figure, there's a drop. But not only that, even budget deficit also is a drop compared to 2023. So all of these are pointers that, yes, we may see a reversal of that begin this year.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So I hear you clearly, and I appreciate the sentiments for reversals, in 2024. I mean, we see a lot of effort on the side of the new government for fiscal and monetary policy reforms. We see an indication of reduction in wastage and the ability of the government to take decisions, that may correct any policy mismatch, that seem not to work or that seem not to be able to get results, for us. So I share your sentiment, and we'll see that by the time we get to Q3, or even by the half year, we'll see how these reforms, how far we can go, with the reforms and the output, in the economic performance. So thank you for that. So there's an opportunity for our participants to pose their questions, online. Please go ahead to post your questions because we're going to take your questions after we're done. So keep posting your questions or comments, on the chat room. So, Doctor, but it's good to also look at Nigeria does not exist alone in the global economic market, but it's also good for us to look at the global economic, outlook and the perspective of other big economies. If you look at, according to IMF, global growth is expected to moderate to 2.9% in 2024, as against 3.3% in 2023. If you look at the advanced economies, 1.4% in 2023, as against 1.5%, that we saw in previous year. Emerging economy, 4% this year, as again, the same 4% that we saw in 2023. So nothing seriously changing. But sub-Saharan Africa, right, 4% in.
Yeah.
economy back on track. Whatever happened in the global market will filter to sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, Nigeria in particular stand to benefit or suffer from whatever we see. What's your take on global economic outlook in 2024?
All right, thank you so very much. Very, very important question there. Because as rightly started, Nigeria is not an island on its own. So now the way we are looking at 2024 is this. Number one is that the largest economy in the world, that's the US economy, which has a GDP of about $25.7 trillion, thereabout, now has been growing strongly in the post-COVID period. And it has prospect of growing strongly in 2024 still. Now, the second largest economy, the Chinese economy, has been the major concern globally. And it still remains that in this year, 2024. And why is that so? If you look back to the last 46 years, the performance of the Chinese economy has been the major driver of global economic growth. And so when we got to 2023 and the Chinese economy slowed down, and for obvious reasons anyway, trouble with its real estate sector, which accounts for between 31 and 34% of its GDP, and of course, again, consumer confidence waning, which of course had also meant China had to fight most of 2023 with the fear of deflation, not inflation now. So it then meant the government had to intervene, not only in the real estate sector, we also put out intervention funds to encourage households and families to spend more on household products and also electric vehicles in particular. So now, the fear this year is that if the Chinese economy doesn't pick up again and grow strongly, the growth impetus expected for the global economy this year might not be attainable. That's on the one side. But interestingly also, when you look at India, which is also among the top 10, now the largest, the most populated country in the world since June 2023. Now, India's economy has been recalibrated, so to say. And so there's prospect of growth from India. But in terms of GDP, India is very far away from China and the US. So even though positive, but what it can bring in terms of global growth benefit is not in any way comparable to what we can get from China. So the issue now is, in fact, if you look at the oil market in the last 2 weeks, or in fact, let me say the last 1 month, okay, the vagaries of the oil market prices has been largely reflective of what is happening in China. We wake up this morning, we're all positive about the Chinese economy, and then the price of crude oil goes up. And then the next day, the news is that Chinese economy is struggling somewhat. And then, of course, the price of crude oil dampens. So that is the general pattern currently. So we now say, okay, what do we expect this year? There's a likelihood that the Chinese economy will stabilize this year. And of course, the pointers are there. And if that happens, and of course, I'm taking this from the Chinese PMI, the latest data that came out early this week, that was on Monday. Okay, if you look at those, they are pointed that the Chinese economy is gradually recovering. So if that plays out, then we expect global economy to regain an impetus. But there's an interesting perspective that I want to bring here that we generally are missing out in our analysis. Now, there's the emerging, markets you mentioned. There's Sub-Saharan Africa that you also mentioned. Now, when you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, of course, the latest GDP data places us as number 2 behind Egypt, by the way. Egypt topped us a little in 2023 from the World Bank estimate that I checked out yesterday. Now, if you look at the top 3, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, we are not growing that strongly. But funnily, the 4th fastest growing economy in the world is our neighbor, Niger Republic. That would be a shocker to many people here, because the Niger Republic economy is growing at 11%, which puts it at the 4th fastest growing economy in the world. But again, the question is, what is the size of the economy? So when you place all of these, so countries like Ethiopia are growing very fast. They are Sub-Saharan Africa. So the question then, bringing it back home is, what should Nigeria do? Because whether we like it or not, fossil fuel will still remain relevant globally. Okay? And that places Nigeria in a place of importance. If you look at what happened yesterday, for example, it's an interesting one. All major crude prices went down. But Nigeria's burning light went up in the data that came out yesterday, oil market internationally. So that is a pointer. Now, okay, the government should take seriously new investments in the oil sector, then continue with the drive for non-US economic growth as well. I think that is what I will take as the interpretation for us. The stronger the oil sector is internationally, the better for Nigeria. And then take that across to now refining oil locally, which we'll talk about later.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. And of course, I like the conversation, especially as regards, crude oil and how it affects Nigeria's revenue, and much later in this conversation, I would like to talk about the impact of fossil fuel, and the latest conversations, that we're having, in the world, and how that will affect Nigeria eventually, because we need to be careful, and also we need to know the impact that will bring, on our effect revenue. But I want us to come back home again. And of course, one of the major things, one of the things that we need to discuss is inflation. And we saw what happened in 2023. And I don't think we're going to have any much improvement in 2024. I mean, for 2023, CPI average at 24.12 for as at November 2023, and settled at about 28.2% in November. 28%, that's a big deal, because you can see what the impact will be on the ordinary man on the streets, and of course business, in terms of the impact on cost of running business. Core inflation 20.78 as at November 23. Food inflation 32.84 as at November. Okay, so doctor, has inflation been controlled? And what are you predicting for 2024? What do you see as the way forward in 2024? What do you see?
Okay, thank you so very much. Now, let me come from the question of what do I expect? And then I will give you my thinking about that and link that with what the government said they want to do, vis-a-vis our own evaluation of their capacity to do it. Okay? As rightly said, cost of doing business went through the roof in 2023, as well as the cost of living, because these have implications not only for businesses, but for families, and then for employees in terms of retention, attrition, and the popular Japa syndrome that we all talk about. Okay? Now, when you look at our inflation, as rightly said, the big driver there is food inflation. And when it comes to food inflation, then look at food security, which has 4 components. But the fundamental ones are the first 2 components to Nigeria, and that is food availability and then food affordability. Now, why is it that we cannot achieve those 2? 2 major reasons. Number 1 is insecurity, which also has a bearing with climate change. Oftentimes, people don't relate climate change to insecurity in Nigeria, which is also happening all over the world. Now, as desert encroaches, you find that cultivable land is also shrinking. And that means that both cultivation of land for food as well as for animal husbandry becomes a major issue. So if that is not properly managed, then you have incessant clashes between herders and farmers, which has played out. Now, I sounded a warning to the previous administration in January 2017, to be specific, that if we did not deal with that decisively, that we'll likely see in another 2 years food inflation go through the roof. So the last administration cannot say they did not get a warning on that and suggestion on what to do. Okay? So the reality we are facing today is simply common sense. Now, if such clashes expand to the major food basket of the nation, clearly the food that gets from the farm to the markets will reduce. Once supply contracts, is basic economics 101, as we call it. Too few goods are now being chased by a lot more money. That means the price will go up. It's basic economics. So, and of course, it has played out. But there's also the other dimension. That's why I said there are two issues, and that is wastage. Now, the estimate we have is that about 60% of harvest is lost. That is post-harvest losses. It's about 60% in Nigeria because we lack two major things. One, processing capacity and storage. So in which case, the direction for this government to go is, in order to deal with inflation, which is driven largely by food inflation, is to ensure we invest in storage and also processing so that we reduce post-harvest losses significantly. If we do that, the food availability off and during season will become steady. One that is steady, then food inflation can dampen. Unfortunately, what Central Bank has done in dealing with inflation in the last 14 years is to persistently raise the monetary policy rate. And we conducted studies and showed them clearly that yes, given that other things will impact inflation rate, but the impact of interest rate on inflation in Nigeria in the last 40 years for the study I carried out is just about 32-33%. Which there are many other factors that we should have given attention to. And that is what we are bringing before the current administration. Happily also, the president has been talking about food security and hoping they will go this route of doing something with respect to processing and packaging. Not necessarily that government should invest in them, but create an environment conducive for private investors to go into that space so that we can dampen food inflation and therefore get headline inflation to begin to come down.
Thank you, Doctor.
That's the way I see this.
If you put on your binoculars, right, and you want to project into November, December 24, where do you see inflation settle at?
Well, I see inflation rates coming down, especially during the second half of this year, and for two major reasons. Now, there was something I would have also mentioned in response to the last question, and that's the role of unified exchange rates in the inflation spike we saw in the second half of 2023. Okay, but the unfortunate thing there was that most of our merchandise traders, you made reference to the devaluation of the naira and its depreciation in the parallel market as the reason for marking up their prices. But a good number of them were not sincere about it. And how do I mean? When you check depreciation at the official window, it was 100.2% between December 2022 and December 2023. When you check depreciation at the parallel market, December 2022 to December 2023, it was 35%, which means Naira lost more value at a window where most of us were not buying FX from. But in marking up our prices, selling prices, we were making reference to the devaluation percentage at the official window. Okay? So now, in answer to this question, what do I see happening between the first quarter of this year and second quarter? I see the exchange value of the Naira stabilizing. That is, the FX market will stabilize. It's a normal thing in economics. We call it, you arrive at a new equilibrium, and then everybody recalibrates to that new equilibrium and begins to run from there. We've seen that play out with respect to the price, the pump prices of refined petroleum products. When the subsidy was first removed, the number of vehicles on the roads reduced significantly. And so you could move around in Lagos freely without worrying about traffic jam. But 3 months after, Lagos returned to what it was. Traffic jam everywhere. And I told myself as an economist that yes, it appears most of us have adjusted to the new equilibrium. And so we are going into our economic activities, factoring that into all the assumptions we make in living our life. So priorities reset for businesses and also for households. So I see the same thing happening in the first half of this year with exchange rate. So if that happens, it means we are looking at the second half when inflation rates will likely moderate. But I don't see it going below 20%. And why do I say that? It is because the economy is also expected to grow. Anytime the economy is growing, growth normally comes with inflationary pressures as well. So if we get it right with dealing with food inflation on the one hand, and then exchange rate stabilizes, okay, and we get to the new equilibrium from which we now run businesses, we may see the impact of that on inflation moderate. But I don't see the moderation taking it below 20%. So my own expectation is something in the neighborhood of 23.5%. Although the government, if you look at the budget of this year, they expect inflation to moderate to 21%. That's the assumption in this year's budget. But I see it more like 23.5% for the reasons I gave.
Fantastic. So you're projecting 23%, and I think Minister for Budget and Planning, and MBS, talking about 21%, so, I mean, let's see, how that goes. Thank you very much, Doctor. So please, participants, please keep posting your questions. We should take advantage of Dr. Adedikpe's presence today and post as many questions as possible. And later we're going to get into how all these major things affect your businesses, eventually. But Doctor, next thing, that naturally, I mean, the next thing I want to talk about will be fuel subsidy, and what the government is doing to ameliorate, the effect, the effect of fuel subsidy removal. So we know the government has put in place some mitigants, to pushing the effect of this fuel subsidy, and of course, the attendant impact on inflation. What, in your assessment, is the right thing to do by the government? I mean, we hear a lot of things about palliatives, cash transfers here and there. I don't know whether they ever worked, and of course, we've seen a lot of leakages coming from the way that has been managed. What do you think is the proper thing for government to do in your own view if you want to ameliorate the impact of fuel subsidy on Nigerians? What will you be advocating for?
Okay, thank you. Very excellent question, because that's a central issue for us as of today. Given where we are coming from, deepening poverty as one of the challenges in our environment here, and of course, the fact that you now implemented reforms had inflationary implications, as you said. Now, government put out a number of things. I think some executive orders signed by Mr. President. One of them relating to, spending about 75 billion naira between July last year, 2023, and March 2024. And the idea is to fund enterprises that have great potential to kickstart, what they call sustainable economic growth. For economic growth to be sustainable means it is creating jobs and not only creating wealth, which was our problem in the last so many years. We are creating millionaires instead of creating jobs. Okay, so that's why we say that there's nothing wrong with subsidy itself, but it's a big issue subsidizing production and subsidizing consumption. That is a lot more effective to subsidize production rather than subsidize consumption. But it also means that the producers so subsidized, we also operate in good faith and ensure that the subsidy they receive will also be passed on to the end consumers. And I will give rise to illustrate. A lot of companies benefited from the Anchor Borrowers Program of the Central Bank Management, the SY Management, okay? But when the rice they were producing and processing came to the market, they were selling at about the same price, or let me say prices, as imported rice. And my question is, as an economist, that if you had access to subsidized loans to produce and process rice in Nigeria, why should your rice hit the market at the same price as the one that is imported? If you look around the world, in fact, we normally use the example of the export-led economies like German economy, Chinese, South Korea, okay, and a couple of others, but those three are usually the ones who put out frontally. Most of what their government did was to subsidize producers. And so that made them able to produce at a cost that will result in selling price that makes them competitive internationally to start with, but also in a position to now substitute for imports. So in which case, we are producing to take care of local consumption, but where we now export also, we are competitive in terms of export from some other countries to our target market. So now, if those who benefit from subsidies to production pass it on to the consumers, then we get the benefits of this executive order President Tinubu signed. The 75 billion, of course, another 125 billion to MSMEs that he announced, you know, and all of these, of course, the conditional grants, which is the one that was bastardized anyway, as you mentioned, and of course, working on that. How do we block the leakages? And I'm happy with what we are getting now, that once there's an evidence of that, there is immediate investigation. Not that we just be talking about it, you and I as analysts, and that's where it ends. And we see also now a president who responds to our sound bites. For example, what he rolled out 2 days ago, or was it yesterday, that when he also travels, the number of people that will travel with him is now limited to 25. And if it is local, 20. With the VP and First Lady, 5 only. So, I mean, all of those give us indication, and a few other things they have done that they are listening. That's why we need to keep this conversation ongoing. Okay? What we expect them to do is to implement effectively. That has been the major problem of this country. Fantastic plans over the years, but we are very poor at execution. There's some silver lining, okay, in the space with what happened Monday this week. With now ability of Nigerians to apply for international passport online and get everything done online until you have to go for capturing. That eliminates human contact and opportunities for corruption, which is good. Okay? So, and I want the government also to give more attention to, as they are doing now, to solid minerals, where the value we have estimated is, in fact, multiples of what you make from the sale of crude oil. And of course, the other one is the blue economy. Happily, President Tinubu set up a ministry for that. And I hope they'll be able to drive that. Estimated at about $20 billion annually. That's the blue economy. And we can do a lot within that space. So the key thing for me is execution of what he has said. He has said the right things. But let them execute and also look closely at the scorecard on a quarterly basis, not annually.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And I hear you clearly. You know, the quantum of the impact of those subsidies and how government should properly channel them. You know, as some of those things they have been concerned with. You know, I mean, MSME. You know, loans of about 75 billion. I don't know what impact that will have on the economy, and of course, subsidizing producer of agricultural goods and grains. You know, that would eventually trickle down, to consumers. You know, so I hear you clearly. So the next is foreign exchange, and Naira has taken a big beating since 2023. I mean, from what you said earlier, at the NAFEM window, 100% decline. The last 1 year, the parallel market 35%. The parallel market, I mean, Naira as at the last count, maybe 1,200 Naira against dollar, pounds at about 1,600 Naira at the parallel market. So, what measures would you recommend that government should adopt to stabilize, Naira? I know you have some very radical views, in respect of this, and I've heard you at many occasions speak about what government should be doing. But we would like to, for the benefit of our participants, we'd like to hear you again. what should government be doing? We have a new CBN governor, we have a new finance minister. They seem to be working together, having come from, similar, political family. What will you advocate, for government in terms of, what we can do to save Naira from this, for what we're seeing?
Okay, very, very key question. Now, similar to the question I was asked way back in November 2002 at the annual Monetary Policy Conference of the Central Bank of Nigeria. And this was the way I dealt with it. I looked at the then sitting governor of Central Bank, that's the Baba Joseph Sanusi. And I asked the Baba, I said, sir, if this economy works, President Obasanjo will take the credit. But if it doesn't work, you will take the blame. You agree, sir? He said, yes. I said, okay, fine. Now, what Central Bank wants me to look at and what I describe are the three macroeconomic prices. That's inflation rate, interest rate, exchange rate. So which one should they focus on? I said it's very simple for me. Which one of them does everything in the economy react to when there are movements in it? And everybody found it easy to agree with me is the exchange rate. So the question for us now today is, what should this government do to stabilize the exchange value of the Naira? We take that from what data says, all right? Now, and it's from two angles. First is what we import. The second is what we export. If you look at our merchandise export, in 2023, 89% of our exports was hydrocarbons, and that is crude oil, condensate, and associated gas. Meaning that in terms of any foreign exchange, we are highly vulnerable. But that means we depend on first oil production and then oil export, because they are not the same figures. And then dealing with that black box, that's what I call it. We had a black box in that place in the last 30 years thereabout, where we provided 450,000 barrels of crude oil per day for domestic refining. Even when our refineries were not working. And of course, at some point we say, okay, we are swapping that. If you actually swap that, it means it should account for what we consume as refined petroleum products locally. In which case, the space it gives us for export should be the difference between production figure and that allocation of 40,000 barrels per day. But it has not worked out like that. So what I've seen this new government do, which is in the right direction, is now say, look, everything must be done transparently, bring everything on the table. So we now only want to see the data, but the public should also see the data. So we now notice that nowadays, we see data on production on a government agency website, not based on assumption, all right? You get that from NNPC on the one hand, you also get it from Central Bank of Nigeria. So that brings some transparency into that. The other side is import. Now, what do we import? Of course, you can make the argument that, yes, our import has been growing in any case in the last 10 years. For towards the end of 2023, or let me be more specific, for the entire year 2023, we're doing on the average monthly import of 1.88 trillion naira. All right? Convert that at the official exchange rate, gives you $2.3 billion monthly on imports. That will appear quite huge. But some might also argue that, look, we are not importing enough because we are not importing as much as Egypt, Morocco, and all these other African countries, even Kenya. When you take that vis-a-vis our GDP, vis-a-vis our population, no doubt. But people also, I call that dubious analysis. You know why? My reason is because when you compare with Nigeria's population, we are large in number, 6th most populated country in the world, estimated at 223 million people as we speak. Okay, we are number 6 in the world. It's like comparing India and China. Take their GDP, compare with their population. India now has the largest population in the world at about 1.4 billion people. China has 1.3 something. Okay, so if you compare GDP of China at $70.something trillion with their population, you get an income per capita of about $12,000 per head. But when you look at India with more people and a much smaller GDP, $1.3 trillion, you will get a per capita income that is very tiny. If I almost compare with that of Nigeria, okay? So the real issue for us is this: what do we export? And that is where I go radical here. That when I look at countries that focus on import, countries like Indonesia is a good example for us because they also have crude oil on the one hand. Their population also, they are more in number than Nigeria, okay? But their economy also has a similar structure to Nigeria's own, not only population, but even religion and many other things. But one key thing I've taken from Indonesia is this: they pick a particular item of focus for export. I call it export anchor. All right, so export in Indonesia is anchored around palm oil. So they do so much in that, about $26 billion annually from export of palm oil only, apart from other palm oil derivatives. So what is the export anchor? We have to decide that. It can't be just export blindly I've been talking about over the years. We need to have an anchor in terms of export. So in which case, once you choose that anchor, everything you do, your capital expenditure in your budget, a good percentage of that will be directed at infrastructure to support that particular product. And then connect that to the African Continental Free Trade area. And that gives Nigeria a whole wide spectrum, about $3 trillion worth of market in NAFTA. So, and I've done some work in that area that I've also presented this way. Take the top 20 African economies, then identify their top 20 imports. I have a table that shows that, okay? So which of those items does Nigeria want to pick out to focus on? And then we now incentivize the producers here in Nigeria so that they can produce quality comparable to those of the countries from where those African countries are importing currently, so that we can now compete them in those African markets. So that is how to go strategic when it comes to developing FX. You know, there are two of our major banks in Nigeria. One is international, one is Nigerian, that have done this work for recently to promote exports. So government should go in that direction. What is the anchor for our export? Of course, with Dangote refinery coming into operation now, that also will help us. You know why? Because about 39–40% of our imports is actually refined petroleum products. When you look at our import data, in which case, once Dangote refinery kicks into operation, that percentage of our imports will no longer have to come from outside. It's replaced with local production and supply. So the interplay of that, and the lesson for me that I want to point out also, is that, and I've said this repeatedly to different governments in Nigeria for decades, government needs to go after private investors with proven capacity across sectors of interest and woo them. Ghanaian government does that actively. They took one of my clients to Ghana. When I was an advisor to the president in 2011, they nearly took Innosis to Ghana. If not for what we introduced then while I was in the government, I served for only 3 months. But that was the period the Ghanaian government sent a delegation to Innosis to take him to Ghana. And I said, if Ghanaian government does that, why can't we do that here? So what can we do to ensure that those private investors deepen and expand their market domestically so that we can then reduce our dependence on imports? That's my view about this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adedikpe. So I hear you, the need for us to diversify, from, crude oil as a means of our foreign exchange, the need for us to be pro-agro products, in any, foreign exchange and so many other ways, I hear you clearly, and I hope, government and private sector, people will take these initiatives and help. It will help the country eventually. So I have 3 more questions, before we go to taking questions. And of course, The next one will be on infrastructure funding. There's been there's this talk, about huge deficit, in terms of our infrastructure. I mean, very poor road network, very poor rail system in the country. Nigeria is a country where we transport people in tens and hundreds, in fact, barely in hundreds, rather than moving people in thousands. And of course, it's difficult to move around because of this. In Lagos, for example, Lagos has made tremendous progress in the last 2 years or so, with the blue rail, the red line coming up on stream, investment in, water transportation, and so on and so forth. The country generally very poor internet bandwidth, especially in rural areas.
Yeah.
So, and if you see our national debt, debt stock, now we are reaching towards 100 trillion, which is a big problem. What are those new initiatives that we should have to fund infrastructure and infrastructure projects in Nigeria? What should government be doing? And of course, private sector as well. How should we be funding infrastructure? And what do we need? Do we have enough time? Do we have enough time? I don't think we have enough time, but what are those initiatives that you want to bring on board?
All right, thank you so very much. Now, let me start from the reality of where we are today, relative to where we were 14 years ago. Now, 14 years ago, most of our roads were in bad shape, but today some of those roads have got a new life. And I make reference to, yes, there may not be many, but each time I look at a major artery from Lagos to the interland, and that's Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, which today is a different ballgame from what it was 10 years ago. That's an improvement we mark in infrastructure. Same thing applied between Kano and Zaria. I can talk about that because I traveled on it recently. And of course, a number of other roads are getting such attention. There's improvement. Rail also, there's improvement in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, no functional railway at all in Nigeria. As of today, 3 corridors are functional. Lagos-Ibadan is functional. Abuja-Kaduna is functional. And of course, Warri-Itakpe also functional. In which case, the question for us now is, how do we deepen that? Incidentally, I was a part of a conversation that we initiated with the late President Yar'Adua in 2008. We branded it Infrastructure Nigeria. And the idea was, let's look at China. China began with infrastructure on a very high note in 2004. Okay? When they set targets for road network, for rail network, and then for internet, what we refer to as netizens, which is how many citizens have access to the internet. We are talking about internet penetration and, of course, deepening and all of this. So now, what China did was simply say the country with the largest stretch of expressway in the world was the US. What was the stretch? 75,000 kilometers. So our target is over the next 30 years, that's to 2034. We want to build expressways network in China as long as 85,000 kilometers. 3 years, China had done 57,000 kilometers. So they revised the target date downward from 2034 to 2010. 2011, China achieved it. That's why I made reference to execution earlier, effective implementation. Then they looked at railway and set their target on Russia. Russia had the longest stretch of rail network in the world. So the plan was for China to outcompete Russia. China achieved that in 2012, the same year they targeted to achieve it. Again, execution. Now, when it came to power, China today is #1 in the world, especially when you talk about green energy. So the issue for us now, of course, for, internet access, as you mentioned, their target was South Korea. South Korea was #1 in the world as at that time. We want to outcompete South Korea. So today, China has made advances in infrastructure. And I helped them to build their manufacturing and become now the manufacturer for the entire world. That was the way we presented it to President Yar'Adua. So, but we said also, it's not about government. Government can't ever find the money to do that. The government needs a roadmap that is very clear, and then also a public-private partnership model that shows clearly that if I put my money as a private investor, I will get it back within the window agreed. If I construct a road and we have an agreement that says I will recoup my investment plus profit in 15 years, then it should not be that I sign an agreement, another government comes into office and nullify the agreement. But it also means also on both sides for the negotiation, because there are many components to PPP. Okay, negotiation is just one. Both sides to the negotiation, we follow the rules of negotiation of PPP. There are about 12 rules there. Okay, they follow the rules and ensure that there's value for the government on the one hand, and there's also value for the private partner on the other hand. That is the way you insulate that agreement from reversal by subsequent government. So now, this is the way to go with infrastructure delivery. We must adopt the PPP model and look at it this way. First is what I call a register of necessary projects that will deliver infrastructure that we need. And then we look at the ones that are bankable. Those that are bankable now are what we put out for PPP delivery. And the ones that are not bankable is what government will allocate money to in its annual budget. That's the way it's done if we are going to get out of this. Okay? So, and if Tinubu administration will reset this area, especially for Nigeria, we can make very quick, steps in bridging the infrastructure deficit that we have.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. Thank you. So the next question, which I believe affects a lot of businesses, in Nigeria now, is the issue of the labor market.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone has had one negative impact or the other. There is a fight in the global market for the best skilled people,
Right.
all over the world, from the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, everywhere. There's a fight for skill. In fact, I know now that Nigeria has also started, fighting for skilled people in Africa. People are now inviting from Ghana, from Kenya to work in Nigeria. Yeah. But this has impacted a lot of businesses in Nigeria. What do you think businesses should be doing to retain their best skilled staff, to retrain their best skilled staff, and to attract new talents, in 2024 and going forward? Because we can't run away from it. In fact, I also understand that even in government circles, government is losing the best of their staff, to people who are going to Canada and all sorts. So what will you be advocating, Doctor?
All right. It's a very tough one, but again, it's something that we can respond to. And I'll put it this way. Now, the cost of training a medical doctor in Nigeria is by far lower than the cost of training a medical doctor in Canada. So if you train them very well in Nigeria, but unfortunately, the environment that they now will work in doesn't offer the kind of remuneration comparable to what that profession attracts in Canada. Naturally, there will be an attraction for such medical doctor to go to Canada. But of course, in there as well, which of course is what most of them don't realize. They look at what a medical doctor earns in UK, Canada, and US. They now convert to Naira and they compare with what they earn here. And they think, oh, I'll be earning so much. But they forget that when they get to Canada, US, Europe, wherever, that they'll be spending according to the culture and lifestyle over there. As what they see as a lot of money when they look at the Naira, equivalent. It's not going to play out that way. So that's the first thing to begin to make them understand that that's the reality. Now, the second thing for us now as a company is that each organization should look at its own business. Ask the first question, what kind of skills do I need to continue to run sustainably and profitably? Now, what skills do I have currently? Is there a gap between those two, what I need and what I have? In which case, companies need to deliberately invest in building the skills gap to start with. So that is developing your own staff, training and retraining. And then you have a pipeline. It makes succession now very important in every organization. So you have to go look at succession beyond the CEO office. There are what you call key risk jobs in every organization. So for every key risk job, must have a successor. So in which case, if the person holding that particular function leaves, then you have a successor that can step in there and do whatever that person is doing. So in which case, you build succession for every key function at minimum of 2 levels. Then you look also at what to pay them. Because in reality, we operate in an inflationary environment. That's why I said it earlier on, that oftentimes business people look at the cost of doing business. They don't consider the cost of living, because inflation has implications for both. In which case, what can I do in order to ensure I make life easier for my own employees? So, but central to all that is what we now call employee engagement, all right? That will lead to employee experience, EX. Most companies have been emphasizing customer experience, CX. But we're now saying, dealing with this issue, we must emphasize EX, employee experience. And central to that is engagement. A good number of them will remain with you when they see that you are interested in their growth, in their development, and that there's a future for them in your organization. So engagement is what makes you communicate that to them on a regular basis. So that will help to some extent to dampen attrition, as we call it. But there's nothing we can do nationally to prevent people emigrating. As people are emigrating, some are also eager to emigrate to Nigeria. It's a global phenomenon. But whatever you lose in terms of emigration, typically you gain in terms of remittances. There was a study done by Bloomberg Economics, published I think in February 2022, which I brought to the attention of Central Bank of Nigeria before we came out with the idea of 5 naira for every dollar, remitted back home. I was behind that, okay? What I did at the time was that, look, 5 countries were top in the world relating to this issue. 2 of them receiving immigrant workers. 3 of them benefiting from home remittances. And the 5 were US and Canada beneficiaries. And then in terms of home remittances, Nigeria, interestingly, Vietnam and Pakistan. Those are the top 5 in the world from that study. So in which case, it is not all bad news when people japa. We should also look at the other side to it, the benefit of home remittances. But the challenge between, when I compare Nigeria and Pakistan at the time, was that in Pakistan, remittances we are getting back onto Pakistan and boosting FX supply in their own domestic market. But in Nigeria, remittances we are not making it back here. Rather, they were hanging out there. And it was the Naira equivalent that beneficiaries were receiving here. So the remittances did not make it to our FX market here. And funnily, second half of 2023, Pakistan began to experience the same thing as Nigeria. So they also ran into FX problem with us. The remittances we saw then in February 2022, we're no longer getting back to Pakistan. In their own case, they had to borrow money from IMF to stabilize the FX market. So we haven't borrowed, okay? So the thing is, in my own company, what I do simply is every day we interrogate how we are faring in terms of income generation and how we are passing that to our employees in terms of what we can do to give them a sense that I'm working for myself. That's part of what we call employee experience, EX.
Yes.
That's one of the best ways to deal with staff attrition in this season we are in.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And that's food for thought for HR and, of course, C-suite, professionals and entrepreneurs on how to, ensure that they retain their best staff and, of course, attract new talents, as we go into 2024 and beyond. The last question, and I promise you I'll ask another one after this. There are so many entrepreneurs, on this as participants today, so many chief executives that I know are here today. But with the current economy trends, high inflation rate, very poor, exchange rates, and so on and so forth, what strategies do you think businesses should adopt to navigate uncertainties and foster growth as we get into 2024?
All right. I will make it as broad as possible, because on this platform, there are participants from diverse sectors. And every sector has its own peculiarities, okay? So, but in a broad sense, what we say is this: when you operate in turbulent times, there are 3 planks to your strategy. The first plank of your strategy is to survive. So how do we survive? That's the first primary thing. When you have assured a platform of survival, then we now talk about stability. We want to stabilize. Now, after you have achieved stability, you can then restart growth. That's the way it runs when you are dealing with designing strategies for handling turbulence. Okay? Now, to start with, you look at your business and ask yourself a question. Is my business an essential one? That's my product or service. Is it an essential or a non-essential? And I'll make this practical. When COVID came and then lockdown began in 2020, we got to a point that globally over 50% of global population was under lockdown. We did a quick strategy session in my firm, and I asked my colleagues a question. Given the nature of our service, is it an essential or non-essential? We discussed around it. We all agreed that our business is non-essential. Because in the time of crisis, essentials are food and anything medical, pharmaceuticals. I said, so if our business is non-essential in this kind of crisis, how do we survive? And I said, one thing we must do now is look at the customers or clients that are giving us business in the last 24 months. Okay? Let's now do an email to every one of them. Now we assist them to dimension what is happening with this COVID thing globally, and how that is also affecting the business space in Nigeria, how that also, third level, is affecting their own industry, and then the advice we have for them on what to do. And that we're offering this for free. We do a webinar for you for free and do this 4-dimensional analysis to guide you on how to survive, how to stabilize and restart growth. We sent out the emails. And I told my colleagues then that the reason we do that in a crisis is because when there's crisis and you're a non-essential business, nobody will look your way. How do you keep your name in their minds when we return to stability? I said we offer them free, useful, valuable services. We had responses, interesting one, Bank of Industry, First Bank, Central Bank, NDIC, all of them asked for it for free, and many others. We did webinars for free on COVID-19. When we did that of NDIC, for example, 54 countries around the world attended, including FDIC in the US. They attended that webinar. Okay? So now, when we did that for free, then after they all stabilized and the crisis began to subside, a good number of them started coming back. Now you did that for us to help us. We want to give you business. We pay you for this. Okay? So just to illustrate in practical terms, You do something unusual in connecting with your existing clients. And then secondly, is now in terms of restarting growth. How do I grow the number of customers? That's a column that runs down. Then the products and services I have is along a row. So how do I deepen for each customer? How do I make them buy from me different products and services? So when you drive down and also across, you are deepening your income base. Which is why we say that in an inflationary environment that we find ourselves now, and it's a global phenomenon anyway. In fact, as we speak now, Japan is sweating. Last year, second half, 2023, we picked out Japan, South Korea, US, among major economies where inflation rate was trending downwards. But December, coming to this January, inflation has gone on an uptick in Japan. All right? So it's a global phenomenon. Anytime everybody is struggling with cost, the best strategy is to grow your income. So in which case, aggressive growth of income is the way to go. So that's the one that applies generally to every one of us. So I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adedipe. You know, it's been fantastic having this fire chat with you. But, you know, we won't leave you until, you know, you attend to some of the questions that, you know, are posted by participants. I think, you know, we have about 6 of such questions. Some of them you have answered, you know, during fire chat, but you know, I'll start by, there's a question from Matthew Akinlade. Food inflation could be reduced by subsidizing the agricultural sector. What is your take on our bad road infrastructure, which leads to losses of food products on the road to consumers? I strongly believe that attention to improving road infrastructure will impact positively on bringing down food inflation. I think, you know, you already mentioned that, you know, when you were talking about infrastructure, but do you have any other?
Well, another thing I did actually mention is what President Tinubu has done. Twice, he has signed off monies to state governments, billions of naira to every state government in Nigeria. So the question is this: what are those state governments doing with the money he gave them for infrastructure purposes? Because it was specific. He has done that twice. That money was released to every state in Nigeria for infrastructure purposes. So in my own view, we should now be challenging the sub-national government in that regard. When you talk about budget this year, federal budget, 20.77 trillion. Aggregated state government budgets is 16-point-something trillion. So the question is, what value are we extracting from those budgets as far as roads are concerned? It's a good one you raised, but it also means that, yes, it's an area we need to give attention to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adedipe. So I'll take 2 questions, you know, at the same time now, so you can save a lot of time. There's one from Olu Oshinusi. Okay. Many analysts have diverse impression on the effect of Dangote refinery, Port Harcourt refinery on the price of fuel at retail rate. While some said the price reduction may not be feasible, others said the reduction, if any, will be marginal, as low as 10 naira. What's your opinion on the effect of these refineries as they become operational on price of PMS? That's number 1. Number 2, from another participant, with potential shift in the trade dynamics at the global level, what is Nigeria doing to adapt and diversify its export markets and sources of imports? And how are these changes being leveraged to maximize opportunities and minimize disruption in trade? I think you touched some of these questions, but specifically on the refineries, Dangote and Port Harcourt, you know, and other worry coming on stream 2024, 2025. Do you think it will have any impact on, you know, price of, you know, PMS?
Well, for me, the impact will be there quite all right. It might not be as low as 10 naira. We may have impact that can move maybe up to 100 naira. And I will tell you the reason. Now, when you look at what we pay today at the pump head for refined petroleum products, 85% of what you and I pay is actually driven by 2 elements. One is the cost of importation and exchange rate. In which case, only 15% of what we pay today is due to government charges, transportation and other elements. I know that because I serve on a board, that deals with that issue on a weekly basis. All right. So in which case, if we no longer need to import the sourcified products locally, that means the big part of FX rates across the cost of imported products, which is 85%, would of course be dampened. But as we say, it will go beyond 10 naira, I can tell you that, because I deal with the data, because of privileged access to information. Okay, it will go beyond that. So, but the thing really is that we can get a lot more in that regard, depending on the agreement between the government entity that supplies crude to those refineries and then what we expect at the selling price. We can call it quote and unquote good faith. If there's good faith between them, we'll ensure we supply you crude at this agreed price. And that means you have this rate within which your refined product should come to. We know what it costs to refine a barrel of crude oil globally. It's a range of $3 to $5 per barrel. Most efficient refinery anywhere in the world is $3 per barrel. The inefficient old ones, $5 per barrel. Okay? So we know all the arithmetics and the figures in there. That's on the one side. Okay? Now, on the second question, and I'm happy that question came on. Globally, since January 2022, carrying in from 2021, there's an observation of a shift in trade flows. This one is not just about Nigeria. It's happening all over the world. There's a pattern that developed post-COVID, where most major exporters are now starting their factories in their major markets. We call it new manufacturing. I actually saw new manufacturing in Nigeria post-COVID before a colleague and friend of mine, who is also a professional economist, pointed out this global shift in trade. And I said, okay, so that explains what I observed in Nigeria and called new manufacturing. So most companies that export are now looking at their major export markets and setting up their factories in those locations, because there's now intensified what I call deglobalization, where many countries are now looking inwards. And America is leading that as we speak. It is, let's produce what we consume so that we can depend less on China. That's the primary thing for the US. And of course, the same thing happened between South Korea, Japan, vis-a-vis China, Taiwan, for example. So, which is part of why there's this geopolitics also playing out there. But Taiwan is claiming to be on its own because a lot of factories that the Taiwanese investors had in China, they moved back to Taiwan. China is now saying, okay, if that's the case, Taiwan really is an island of China. It's part of mainland China. So the geopolitics is going on there. Also, it's commercial in nature, related to this question you asked. But there's a shift in global trade in that direction. And Nigeria, of course, certainly is benefiting from that. The only problem we have, for me, is that the new manufacturing happening in Nigeria today, ladies and gentlemen, is driven by three nationalities: the Chinese, the Indians, and the Lebanese, not Nigerians. And for me, that's a food for thought. Yes. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. So before we go to your final thoughts, I have two more questions, and one of them is particularly interesting, and I would like you to help us in that regard. Number one, so there's an anonymous attendee that's asking about the cash crunch in Q1 23 as one of the major events in that year. Now the situation is back. Yeah, it's back, and of course we should keep it at the front burner. So his question is, what's the story about this current crisis and what's the way out? That's number one. And the last one, which I really, don't like talking about all the time, is the issue of corruption. Corruption has been a song since 1960. What is your views on the impact of corruption on the economy? We have, and we still see a series of funds diversion, all this slow growth as a low trust is a renewed hope policy of government, not another fairy tale which the youth are saying. So cash crunch, corruption.
All right. Cash crunch. Incidentally, I'm on a platform of some senior bankers in Nigeria, and this issue came up for discussion just yesterday. And one of the top bankers is still in operation anyway, one of our junior colleagues, but he's an ED in one of the banks. And he said that what is actually happening is that cash has not gone anywhere, but cash is being unfortunately, unprofessionally handled by our banks. That in fact, a lot of bank staff in banking operations are also POS operators. So when depositors, that was the way this fellow brought it. Actually, the person that raised it is a former MD of a bank. You know, he owns 2 microfinance banks, by the way. And he said what they discovered in their survey is that staff of banking operations units or branches of banks will buy deposits that customers are bringing in. They buy the deposits. Instead of getting deposits paid into their own bank, they buy from those depositors and now take it to their own POS as agents, where they make money for themselves. So now yesterday was when I will hear this for the first time, because I've also been asking that question like other Nigerians like you. Where has the money gone to? If we have over 3 trillion naira out of the banking system in circulation, where is the cash? So it relates also to the second issue mentioned, the issue of corruption. My own view generally is this, that is a very radical one. And I brought this particularly to the conversation that we began in the 1990s about corporate governance in Nigeria. I introduced a led to corporate governance code, but we have not really gotten there yet, that there must be consequences for errant behavior in such a way that the consequence in terms of weight and value is by far greater than the benefit derived from errant behavior. So until we do that in Nigeria, we cannot deal with the present issue of cash crunch, because people do it because there's no consequence that is greater than the benefit they are deriving. And the same thing goes with corruption. You might call it the economics of corruption. In fact, we had a conversation when I was still a student in the 1970s at the University of Ife on the economics of corruption. My teacher there was the late Professor Sam Aluko. Okay? And he said, when you talk about corruption all over the world, that in many countries, when people steal money from government, they don't take it outside their countries. They invest within their country. So it still starts to create value locally, even though the source is dirty, but at least it is not taken out. But in Nigeria, when people steal, especially government money, they take it out. And so it goes to benefit the economies where they keep the money. And that is why nowadays, internationally, there is more traction in getting collaboration across countries, which is why Nigeria benefited from the repatriation of Abacha loot, as you call it, quote and unquote. Okay? Then it should be done in such a way that when people will lose what they have stolen, what they lose should be greater than what they stole. So consequence design and management is my own recipe for dealing with corruption and such errant behavior that results in cash crunch. I will leave it there. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abiodun Adedipe. It's been absolutely amazing, you know, having you as our speaker at DCSL Fire Chat, the webinar for today. And thank you very much for doing justice, you know, to today's discussion. But lastly, you know, we would like to have your final thoughts, you know, on Nigeria in 2024. I mean, Kodro's our research, you know, reports every year is always Nigeria for that year. So Nigeria in 2024, your final thoughts.
All right, thank you so very much. Now, as you mentioned to us at the beginning of this chat, that the World Bank projected 3.3% growth for our GDP, because it came out in their global economic prospects, and of course, there are basis for that as well. Of course, federal government is projecting 3.88% growth for the economy this year. In BA Consol, we are looking at 3.47%. But as you rightly said, this is something we do on a quarterly basis. When we get to April, we look at what happened first quarter and review that, whether it will be the same or it will change. But one thing is this: everybody that is doing outlook about Nigeria is pointing at the reforms of the current administration, and then so far the demonstration of capacity to implement the reforms. But one big thing for me is the idea President Tinubu mentioned, and that is now measuring performance of ministers and using that to decide whether you remain in the cabinet or you are out. For me, it's a pleasant development, because I've canvassed for this for close to 30 years, ladies and gentlemen. I canvassed for it during Obasanjo's tenure, the short period of Yaradua, the period of Jonathan, the 8 years of Buhari. I canvassed for this. I went as far as the memo to presidents during Buhari's time, which was accepted but not implemented. So coming to that for me is a pointer. They may likely see the economic growth stronger than in 2023, this year, and now form a pedestal for faster growth in 2025. But now beyond that also, we've arrived at a new equilibrium for FX. So in my own view, I see an average FX at the NAFEX window, that's official, that may be around 900 Naira. Parallel market has reached a threshold that I think we may see is, stability around 1,230 Naira thereabout. So it cannot go worse. It may go higher, but it will return to that level. So what it then means is that if we are going to run, this reform will be effective. The only thing I think this government needs to change is to say, look, we are not going the route we have gone so far about floating the Naira. All they have done is to float the Naira. Our economy is not strong enough to support a floated Naira. I would rather recommend that they come up with a band within which the government will say officially the Naira exchange rate will not go beyond this level. That is what the private sector needs for planning purposes. So not the vagaries of the market. Where Monday this week, the rate was 900 something. Yesterday, it was over 1,000 at the official window. From 890 something on Monday, Tuesday to 1,000 something. Maybe today it will go down again. So that kind of vagary doesn't help private sector planning. And why do I say private sector? Private sector accounts for about 89 to 90% of our GDP. All government expenditure aggregated, federal, state, local government, is about 10, maximum 11% of our GDP. And that is why it is important to set an environment conducive for business. And they're already moving in that direction. With our complaints getting to president and him responding to it. If he keeps doing that, then we see an economy this year that might grow stronger on the back of a stronger private sector and a more serious public sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're very grateful for your for participating, and we hear you clearly. I mean, the success we made this year is dependent on quality of reforms and the capacity of the people in government on how they're able to execute these reforms, and of course, how the president is able to appraise, the people who are working with him, and most importantly, how the private sector is also able to take advantage of opportunities that we'll see around. But, Doctor, there's good news, and of course, I'm very happy to share this, with our participant. The NGX, Nigerian Stock Market All Share Index, is up almost 10% in January, 9.7 as I speak to you.
Yeah.
And, year to date, 9.7. The All Share Index itself 82,000, never before. So it looks like there's cheerful news, somewhere around the corner. And of course, our participants should take advantage of the opportunities that we can find in the market. So, thank you very much, Doctor. And we hope to see you soon. Anytime we call on you, I hope you'll be available to come for another DCSL, fire chat. So over to you, Nike.
I must also not be without saying thank you to you. Because the way you manage this also made us get value. And I must also say thank you for making it very conversational and a lot of value extracted. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, over to you, Nike.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Let me quickly just appreciate Dr. Adedipe. Thank you very much for your exceptional guidance, your expertise, and a brilliant session. Your insights are indeed thought-provoking, and it did give participants some things to look forward to and to plan better in our various businesses. Your clear explanations and insights and insightful examples also made complex concepts accessible to all on the call. It is always an honor to learn from your wealth of experience, and we thank you for sparing some hours to be with us today. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So our able moderator, thank you very much, Mr. Agbenyogi. We thank you for your invaluable contributions as well. Your exceptional organizational skills, your professionalism, attention to details, the way you engaged Dr. Adedipe made the session worthwhile and also allowed for an extensive exploration of the topic. We couldn't have done so much. We thought we couldn't achieve so much in the hours that we had allotted, but thank you for making it seamless. We thank you for your time and do not take it for granted. To our participants, thank you for joining us today as well. And we do hope that the time that you've spent with us today has been worthwhile. We know that some network issues probably happen at some point, so we'll please urge you to visit our YouTube page on DCSL Nigeria on YouTube to listen to the recording again. Would circulate the link later today to participants so that if you like to refresh your memories on what we've discussed today, you'll be able to listen to the session again. We'd like to just call it a wrap here. It's almost 1 p.m. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to welcoming you at future DCSL events. Please follow us on all our various social media platforms. On Instagram, we're DCSL Nigeria. On LinkedIn, we're DCSL Corporate Services Limited. And on YouTube, we're DCSL Nigeria. On all of these pages, we post very useful insights on various issues on the economy, on corporate governance, on compliance, and issues bordering board of directors and the key corporate governance organs. Please don't miss out any of them so that you benefit from our newsletters and insights. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And please help collate, just give us feedback once we deploy the poll, the feedback link at the end of this session. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, Dr. Adedipe, once again. Thank you very much, Mr. Agbenyogi. And thank you very much to all our participants. Do enjoy the rest of your day. It's a wrap from our end.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.